Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rob Gustafson, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to ManyQuest. ManyQuest is my idea for a role-playing game that incorporates anybody who watches the YouTube series ManyQuest. It is a role-playing game in as much as there is a protagonist, who will be going through an adventure. The ability to play that role rests on the viewers. Anybody who watches the series in a timely fashion can leave a comment directing how they would like to see the protagonist act, what they would say, what they would do, if they are going to be clever or perhaps do the thing that dooms them. It's all in the hands of the viewers. And everybody who puts in a comment before the next ManyQuest video is posted basically will get a vote. When either a week has passed or 10 votes have been put down, I will sum them all up, although some of them the protagonist will refuse to do. If you insist that in the face of a charging minotaur, the protagonist takes off his clothes and smiles seductively, well, actually, considering the protagonist, that still might happen. But there's a chance that some things will just be ruled out because they're inappropriate to the character or inappropriate to all laws of decency. However, those people who vote will have the actual deed that gets done selected out of the potential votes by random lot. So it'll be interesting. If you did not get your vote picked, you will get an extra point added to the next vote that you cast, so that your odds of getting your vote in accumulate as you are passed by from when you make your selections. And when your vote is ultimately selected, you will start all over again at 0 and accumulate again as before. So there's still a chance that you may be selected, and if this system becomes too cumbersome, we'll think of something else down the road. But in this way, I want everybody to feel that they can participate, they can throw out their ideas and show how clever they are, or just have fun with it. We'll see together. Now, ManyQuest is powered by my very own dice file role-playing game system, which is a very, very simple system in concept. The core of the game is everything that can influence anything in the game is represented by a die roll. And all those funny dice that you use in fantasy games, from 4-sided dice all the way up to 12-sided dice, and all the dice values in between. If it is not something that has a great deal of potential, say a skill that you've never really been trained in, or a tool that is not particularly useful, or a hindrance that's not excessively hindering, it's represented by the very lowest die value, or a 4-sided die. If it is something that you are very skilled with, say you are a master with a sword, and you're swinging a sword, you get to roll a higher die value. The greatest die value is what is taken for the success. So if you roll several dice because you have several influencing factors, you would just take the highest of the lot. If you roll the maximum value on any one of those dice, you add 1 to the ultimate value that you pick. So if all you're rolling is a 4-sided die and you roll a 4, it'll actually serve as a 5. If you were rolling a 10-sided die and a 4-sided die, and you roll an 8 on the 10-sided die, and you roll a 4 on the 4-sided die, that +1 will be added to the 8 to make a 9. So, fairly straightforward. Ones only count if all of your dice values are 1s. So those 1s constitute failure, and essentially a critical failure if all of your dice are 1s. Rolling more dice is a sort of insurance against that ultimate failure. So, it's fairly simple. Nothing too arcane about that. The thing is, unlike a lot of other games, everything that you use may be used as a die value to help in the success of what you're trying to do. So attacking somebody with a sword incorporates using your die for your skill and another value for the sword, because the sword is nothing more than a tool that you are using in your skill to attempt to hurt somebody or, do whatever. So you roll both the value of the gear that you use, the sword, and the value of your skill, and determine which one has the higher value. In this way, somebody, say, who is completely unskilled, with, say, a great sword, a big, long, nasty sword, would use a 4-sided die for their lack of skill and a 10-sided die for the sword. Say they're going up against a master knife fighter who rolls a 10-sided die for their skill with the knife, but only a 4-sided die because they're using a knife, which is a small and, less deadly weapon. But as you can see in the hands of the master, if he can roll higher than a 4, his skill allows him to do more damage than the puny blade that he's wielding, allowing him to possibly get a mortal strike. Whereas the person who is a complete klutz with the sword, just by virtue of carrying a large, nasty sword, might still be able to strike a mortal blow, and those two would be able to fight, well, the sword would be the inexperienced person's equalizer in that case. There are other factors involved, but that's just the rudiments of the system. With that, everything else comes down to what do you incorporate into your skills and abilities, and assessing dice values to all of those. And by changing those, you change the nature of the game. If you want to play a spacefaring, science fiction heavy game, you can do that by assessing different attributes and skills that are going to be important to spacefarer. Your gear then becomes your technological doodads and whiz-bangs and weapons. Whereas if you're going to set it in, say, fantasy medieval, then your skills are going to be probably considerably different, even if most of the core attributes are going to stay the same. And most of your gear is going to also be different. Because you're using a different lens or filter, you can still keep in the same range of dice to be effective, but you can completely change the nature of the game that you're playing in. The same goes with giant mecha robots or dinosaurs or what have you. Dicefile itself has a few intricacies which make it different from other role-playing games. Dicefile has a dice pool, which represents the potential for what your character is able to do in a given scene. For instance, you start out with one die that is the highest value of anything that you can do. For example, if you have a D8 level of skill in swords, then you will have a D8 in your dice pool. You can always at least use that die once in a scene unless you get crippled or injured. So, if you want to do something using that level of skill, you can use the highest value because that is your specialty. That allows you to have the best chance of succeeding at maybe something a little more difficult or really succeeding well at something simple. However, if you don't want to throw your full effort into that, say you're reserving yourself for something else, perhaps you'd rather, perform a feint to draw an opponent off and make them waste an attempt to parry your blow, you might choose to use a lesser value, like a 4-sided die, and roll that instead, reserving your higher value for something else that comes along, or maybe a crippling stroke that you would follow up with. This is all something that is represented in the dice that other game systems usually append to other systems to. This is straightforward. You as the player have the option of making a very strong attempt at something your character is already very good at, or maybe a lesser attempt, so you're not using your highest value dice. Eventually your dice pool will refresh after all participants in the scene have agreed that they're not going to spend any more dice. Perhaps they're reserving them in case so that they can defend themselves against an attack or some such. But you always have the opportunity generally to use your highest value. If you are injured or fatigued, you lose dice out of your dice pool. Yes, your dice pool can shrink the more battered and exhausted you get. A particularly skilled combatant can choose the dice that are lost, so they can take away your top-level dice and carve your potential down. On the other hand, if you are injured and you choose to lose all of your 4-sided dice, the lowest value dice, you lose your ability to react on things that you're not skilled with. You become punch-drunk and slowed to the point where you can't properly react to just everyday things. So the damage system is a little bit different. Eventually your dice do replenish and you do heal or rest and get your energy back. But this system basically physically represents exactly in a way that you can see how battered your character is and how much that's going to slow them down. So it's a bit of an abstract system, but at once it's kind of elegant because it allows you to customize the levels of damage that you take and also a level of strategy and how you're going to expend your resources through a scene. In practice, it means that you may have to keep track of multiple opponents and sources and really plot out what you're going to spend and when and why. Is it best to try to solve an entire combat with one crushing blow initially so that you don't have to worry about a response? Or is it better to feint or hold dice for defense? It all depends on what you decide. So, in essence, that is the core of the strategy of Dice File, is knowing your dice pool and knowing how and when to use your different dice. And that's all you really need to know. I am OmnusI. I am the Game Master, and I am very happy to have you in my game of ManyQuest. Thanks for playing, and let's have fun together, shall we?